This journey has typically taken about 15 odd years each time in order to make this shift. And there's no reason to believe that that's going to stop with this smartphone, right? Like that rectangle's great, and the fact that you're holding it and literally touching that information is awesome. But what's next, right? The curiosity around what's next is literally where we got started, right? Where we said, have we hit the ultimate device, right? The one device that's going to encapsulate the concept of what an electronic device would be in our lives.
आज की ताज़ा खबर। बेंगलुरु में रहने वाले लू और अमेरिका में रहने वाले सिड आपसे कुछ बात करना चाहते हैं। संगीतकार राजेश के साथ आपका स्वागत है लूसिड में।
What's going on, people? I'm Sid, and we are Lucid. In the last 2 years, there's been a surge in the awareness of Web3 and the Metaverse. But the builders of this space have been here for a long time. One such builder is Sai Krishna VK, who is commonly known as Sai Tech in the social world. He's the founder of Scapic, an AR/VR company which was recently acquired by Flipkart, and he brings in the South Indian flavor into the Metaverse. So, hi Sai, how are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Sid.
Uh, what have you been up to, Sai? I know just before this podcast, you're saying you've been doing a lot of things, especially with Flipkart and many other things. How's your life been in like the past few months?
Much like the world around us, right? A bit of a roller coaster is where I think I should caveat things with. Uh, let's step back, right? The year was 2017. Scapic had just started, and our belief was virtual and augmented reality is going to, change the world as we get started. And little did we realize
Right.
that that's going to be a decades-long journey that we're embarking on. So it's very heartening to see the entire narrative around what the metaverse is really come through since the days when we were optimistic about it to now when the rest of
Right.
the world in terms of the imagination at large is starting to be captured as to a persistent world that's actually going to be useful, entertaining, as well as just all across the very fabric of life. So adding some South Indian flavor to that does seem an exciting proposition on one side. And I usually spend my time either talking about it or, more importantly, building something while we're
Right.
getting to chart this whole new world order, right, from scratch. And the joy of building is the fact that you can end up creating something that you like as compared to just wait for it to arrive, I guess.
True, definitely. I think the first time I heard about Scapic was when I was in RV. The year was around 2018, and like I was hosting a TEDx event, and some of the members of TEDx was in the quiz corp, the quizzing community of RV, and they knew this amazing senior who's building a new startup called which is into AR/VR technology, and you know how it is where like we have all these projects in RV, the computer science department, the electronics department. They come up with like very cool ideas to talk to the teachers, but like the prototypes are very small and like not that big. But then they're like, this cool guy who's doing it as a startup. So that's how I got to know about Scapic. So I let's start with Scapic, right? Like it was the year 2017, and you decided that you're gonna embark into the world of AR VR. What was the thought behind that?
When you sort of step back and look at what the hell has happened in the world of computing, right? Even before you and I were born, it's actually a very fascinating journey.
Right.
It's a journey where we've gone from punch cards, mainframes, desktops, laptops, smartphones. And this journey has typically taken about 15 odd years each time in order to make this shift. And there's no reason to
Right.
believe that that's going to stop with the smartphone, right? Like that rectangle is great, and the fact that you're holding it and literally touching that information is awesome. But what's next, right? The curiosity around what's next is literally where we got started, right? Where we said, have we hit
Right.
the ultimate device, right? The one device that's going to encapsulate the concept of what an electronic device would be in our lives, right? And the answer was the smartphone's awfully close, but it's not there yet, right? So how do we go from an information piece that we hold like this in front of us to literally right here, right? And that transition
Right.
seemed one, exciting, two, inevitable, and three, just gloriously uncertain, right? And see, when you're in college, you have very little to lose, right? And the audacity to just get out there and say, you're going to build a virtual and an augmented reality company when practically only a clutch of people were doing it was not because you knew the market or you had incredible subject matter expertise. It was just half naivety and half excitement that you can possibly make a difference out there. And then from there, you just stick it through, I guess. So that's really how the one, the inception, and two, the persistence really came together for Scapic.
Right. And what was the initial idea when you wanted to start Scapic? You knew you wanted to get into the AR VR world. There are like numerous business applications you could have gone towards. So, how did you start off?
When you look at any new technology, right, that we have wanted to work with, when either we were in school, in college, as we grew up, the first thing that we want to do is tweak, uh, try to do something with it, tinker around, right? Uh, when you had an Android phone, you wanted to flash a custom ROM in order to just improve its experience a little more.
True.
Or even earlier than that, right? When you were in fifth grade, you wanted to probably change the theme around Windows in order to make it look more flashy, right? Than what it was. You wanted your wallpaper to be like a video wallpaper from Warcraft, probably, right? Like so,
Yeah.
we're all interesting creatures of tinkering, right? And this very nature to author, right, is a very powerful one. We wish to author something unique on top of a new tool. Technology is a tool, right? And we've always wanted to use this tool to do some sort of authoring, more often than not. The authoring could be a blog, the authoring could be an image, which are the most popular forms of authoring something. But the authoring could be like completely new formats of computer content that people can start using for
Right.
very unique things. That's really what we believed in, right? The human desire to author or create or make is going to be persistent across this reality, an extended one, or anything in between. So we said, if authoring is that important, we've seen companies be successful with authoring. Think of the word processor, right? Like when the
Right.
internet came about, Microsoft Word wasn't a thing, right? So somebody out there said making a word processor is going to make authoring a document easier. And similarly, making a WordPress site is going to make the process of authoring a website easier. So we said, look, if there's going to be authoring that is as popular in every domain that is out there, there is reason to believe that authoring needs to be simpler, faster, easier, and just more fun when you're doing this in a virtual or an augmented reality medium. So you marry authoring and you marry delight and a deep tech platform like VR and AR. That's really where we said there's a massive opportunity or a gap that I think some startups got to fill. Why shouldn't it be us?
Oh, right. And so you had this grand vision of authoring and providing a huge or a great delightful experience to the users in the AR VR world. And you needed a team for this, right? You needed a co-founder, and you have a co-founder like along with whom you built Scapic. So tell us that whole story. How did you find your co-founder and build a team for Scapic?
in the early days, there are three people who will support you: friends, family, and fools, right? That's literally where things start from. And
Right.
so, how do you know when you work with a really good team? You actually have to work with a really bad team to appreciate a really good one, and that's what happened for me, right?
True.
So through the journey of attempting to build startups, you meet people of across all walks of life, and it took me a few tries to understand how I go about my work and what I wish to see in a team I constitute to go on that journey with me. And I was exceptionally lucky in order to get the kind of core team that I did. And my co-founder, his name is Ajay, and Ajay was someone who was in the Bay Area working blissfully on his augmented and virtual reality company where he was the first engineer at, right? I
Okay.
bump into Ajay and then I tell him, look, you're either going to be doing this or we're going to saddle the horse and get out there and try building something because you and I are passionate about this space. No logical human being should be leaving a job in the Bay as awesome as what that was, get back to India and get started building something with a college grad, right? Like if you
Right.
apply common sense to it, that seems to be a very poor decision, right? But that's really
Right.
what some parts of entrepreneurship is: leaps of faith and small jumps that will lead to non-linear outcomes from the same. So he was the half fool, the other half was me, but both of us, foolish enough, gave ourselves a shot that if we get together and try building this, there is going to be meaningful value that we can uncover while we're at it. And that sort of optimism is what perhaps has kept some fuel in the tank going even now. And it is just a real journey where if you find the right co-founder, I think that's a journey that you don't need to think of in months or years, but decades as time progresses.
Right. Yeah. And you found your co-founder in the initial time, and then you started out on your journey of Scapic. What is the first product you set out to build?
So when you look at the virtual and the augmented reality industry back in 2017-18, right? It was nothing like
Right.
what it is today. The most basic things out there won't be working, right? Like the how do you pull up a virtual keyboard inside a VR environment for you to just literally type, right? That didn't exist, right? How do you traverse between two pages inside a virtual reality environment? That didn't exist. So imagine a wild west, right? You're literally picked up and dropped in the middle of nowhere, and someone's telling you that here is where the castles are going to be built, but they give you a teaspoon, right? And now your job is to go dig. Your job's good to go dig a crater big enough in order to then start accommodating anything that you want as a grand vision from there. The teaspoon is what we were given, right? The ability for you to start building on an entirely primitive platform to get going was the first challenge, right? The second challenge was nobody cared, right? Because it's in the middle of nowhere and it's VR, and VR was having a very lull sort of period or time existence then. People don't have a reason to feel that excited about it. So you gotta build, you gotta educate, you gotta sell, and then you gotta convince people that they have to spend meaningful amounts of time on top of whatever software that we create. So he said, look, this is gonna be tough, right? But what if every website or a web browser is able to have light and mid touch VR and AR experiences that just pop in and pop out, right? This is because the concept of the metaverse was too primitive back then. You did not spend all your time in a waking day inside a 3D environment. The 3D environment was a little bit more like a quick ad, right, or a snippet. You use 3D virtual and augmented reality in a small moment, zap in, and you zap out. So what we did was we didn't think of the entire metaverse and said, let's boil the ocean. We said, let's build the simplest authoring tool for making web-based VR and AR experiences for industries such as e-commerce, events, and marketing. Dead simple, right? So we narrowed down our focus into building exceptionally delightful experiences on a no-code tool that is catering to just the marketing and the e-commerce markets. And the moment we did
Right.
that, we realized and we understood who our customers were, and we slowly could start working backwards from feedback, right? Instead of boiling the entire ocean, hoping that this is the next big metaverse platform that was out there. So we took a more lean and validated stance, which I think should help most entrepreneurs, irrespective of what idea they're building.
Right. That's really interesting. So I am currently interning as a product manager at a company called Life 360, which is a B2C location tracking app for families. And one thing that I see consistently is I have a frame of reference like to other apps, right? Like other B2C apps as to what they're doing. But like you were trying to build something that was really new, and there's no frame of reference to think about with respect to this. So how did you go about like building this whole product?
Right. That's a very insightful question in the first place, right? Because we call these playbooks. So when you build a SaaS company, right, you have a SaaS playbook. In fact, you have plenty of SaaS playbooks. When you're building a fintech company, you got a fintech playbook. The been there, done that implementation of what can possibly make this company succeed, right? Improving your odds of success is what a playbook gives you. A playbook for virtual and augmented reality did not exist. What you had was a graveyard, right? A generous graveyard of companies that didn't make the cut, but you did have playbooks. You didn't have formulas or directional pointers to improving your odds of success. So what you had to do was almost twice the backlifting, right? Which is you spent 8 hours in a day learning, prototyping, trying, failing, mostly failing, trying again. The other 8 hours through the day is now going to be spent on here's what has worked over the first eight that I wish to then isolate and build the product further on top of, which effectively meant that we had to basically research, dog food, validate, iterate on top of, as well as then prototype, design the whole 9 yards before we built enough conviction that here's a feature, an addition, or an extension to the platform that actually makes sense that we need to build on to the core, right? So effectively, we were running a research team on one side and a product team on the other side, which is just nuts when you think about it, right? But
True.
the good part about building in deep tech, right, is you set the rules, right? The ability for you to have your research really set the narrative is also exceptionally exciting. So the downside is you got to do all of this yourself, but the upside is you get to set the table.
Wow. Yeah, that line hits. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I was going through one of your articles, and you mentioned that AR VR is not going to be a fad. It's going to be the start of a fundamentally new technology. That's what you started out with in this podcast too. Can you just tell me more about that? Like, when did you realize that this is not going to be a fad anymore? This is not just going to be like another fashion technology, which is people just going to use it for a while and then move away. When did you realize this?
So there are two answers. The first one is your theoretical, right? Which is devices change and the things that we just spoke about, right? But let's step beyond the theoretical. Uh, have you seen these YouTube videos where people wearing virtual reality glasses
True.
lunge forward in front of the TV and end up hurting themselves, right?
Yeah.
Or they get so scared about a roller coaster experience that they scream out aloud, or they try punching something and end up breaking a glass. We've all seen enough videos which are humorous, which which
Right.
which which specifically show people making a bit of a goof of themselves in these situations. But step deeper there. Here's what's happening. The brain is effectively being tricked into believing that that scenario that they're living is so immersive that it needs to have a fight or flight response to what's going on.
Right.
Right? When was the last time any technology did that for you? Never. Right?
True.
Even your smartphone, when you're watching a movie, is going to give you a knee jerk or a quick reaction of sorts, a jump scare. Right? The concept of a jump scare is the most we have evoked a visceral reaction from a TV or a phone or any device that we've had. But in virtual and augmented reality mediums, you are evoking every sort of emotional response curve possible, starting from fear, adrenaline, anticipation, joy, empathy. You're literally encapsulating the ability for the brain to visualize into a medium that's able to convincingly transmit that message or story in a manner where the brain's truly tricked into believing that this is the real deal. And now, given that, I think that's technology worth investing your life's work into, right? The ability for you to effectively generate this box of every emotional response curve possible and provide that to users in an affordable, easy way that people just realize that there is a whole other world they can literally author and build out there.
Wow. That is true, yeah. Yeah, I think the other technology, as you said, is the 3D movies or the 4D movies they say where the chairs move. That's the only other technology I can think of that's like evoke that flight or fight response. So yeah, that's
Right.
really interesting. And the other part I wanted to talk about was the whole building of the company itself, right? On one part, as you said, you were building a product team, you were building a research team where you were trying to balance both. Another part that comes into this as a founder is the cultural aspects of it, like to motivate the team to go forward. Sometimes there's like down times, sometimes there is up times. Like what was your like thought process towards building your whole team, and how do you choose your team members? Did you have any specific way?
Interesting that you mentioned that. I read this in a Simon Sinek book, which is what makes the Navy SEAL different from the Army guy, right? And
Right.
the SEAL 6, specifically, the elite of the elite forces. So when you draw a 2 by 2 matrix of what the SEAL 6 is, you've got trust and performance as, say, the two axes. The best people, business logic tends to make us believe, is going to be high trust and high performance.
True.
Now, that person's non-existent, right? That's a unicorn. If you get one, hold it as close as possible. Do not suffocate it, but hold it definitely as close as possible. But if you get someone who is high performance, low trust, that's a toxically bad recipe, right? That's going to hurt the team, it's going to hurt you, and that's usually not a good representation. But for some reason, we have been trained to believe that a high performance, low trust person is like perfectly good to put up with. No, it's not. Like that's actually detrimentally bad for your team. So the best sort of people who you should invest on are mid trust, or rather high trust and mid performance, right? Because that's what startups are. Startups are an optimistic view of the future by a bunch of people who actually exceptionally trust each other and cover up for each other's areas in complementary skill sets.
Right.
So when you're going for a high trust, mid performance sort of team that you cobble together, what you're doing is you're investing in the slope of learning as compared to the y axis, right? Which effectively means that I wish to work with you not because of how much you know today, but how much you and I are going to know over the years to come, and how much I can trust you in that process to see this journey through with me, right? And that by itself as a filtration process is what you apply to your core team, your co-founders, as well as the people around you usually.
Right. And second point to that is finding the right people, right? As you said, you've been extremely lucky in finding your co-founder. Now there's like this whole concept. I think when I was in college, I had no clue about the concept of networking. Right after college, everyone's like, you have to network. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, how did like you get to meet these amazing people that you could trust and bring onto your startup?
If you look at it, luck, right, is half engineered, right? You should give yourself the opportunity to be lucky, right?
True.
When I say that I'm exceptionally lucky to have come across certain people like Ajay in my life, it is because somewhere, sometime, in some way, there was some amount of deliberate engineering to expose myself to that. Luck is a direct function of surface area, right? Your ability to actually get lucky is a direct reflection of your ability to actually have a surface area where you can let yourself be
Right.
lucky in the first place. So, how does that happen? That happens because you're able to be out there, speak to people, flint a conversation, create something that people want to use, and hence they adore you for the fact that you need it. The ability for you to either push yourself in a social setting or pull the social setting towards you with a creation of yours, either one is going to be a massive gain, a boost, or an upper hand that you get in improving your surface area. And when the surface area improves, your ability to monetize it, your ability to tap into it for people, as well as your ability to learn from this entire fulcrum is all going to increase. So you could be an introvert. It's not required that you need to wear this jacket of let me just go talk to everyone in order to improve the surface area. None at all, right? It would be difficult to find an introvert bigger than I was back in college, right? The difference is the introvert wins the introvert game, which is the ability for you to create a product, right? Create something that makes everyone come to that, right? Make your work perhaps lead the conversation, or if you're an extrovert, make yourself lead the conversation. There are enough variables and enough ways that you can engineer something which improves your surface area without you attempting to be a completely different person.
Yeah, that's really interesting because my second question was going to be about introverts versus extroverts. There's always that conversation. One interesting thing which you mentioned about, if you're an introvert, make something that can lead the conversation, say like product, content, or whatever you're good at, right? So, do you believe in the concept of personal brand in the internet?
I believe that you've got to be irrational and passionate about something that itches you, right? Uh, I think we set a slippery slope with this entire rat race towards content creation, right? Like you with a streaming mic sitting in front of a Twitch audience is not necessarily value addition in a
Right.
net positive way for you or in a net positive way for your audience. Some might be, right? I'm of course talking about the outsized majority here as compared to the small number of people who make meaningful differences to their audiences, value, time, entertainment, and life. I think what has happened is we have started to glorify the concept of generating more media through this thing called content creation that we have forgotten to take for a moment and realize that you need to, one, be obsessively passionate about something even before all of this counts,
Right.
right? Because in the long run, your ability to make a meaningful impact, dent, uh, progress, or just a non-linear way for you to be somebody, right, in that ecosystem is not going to start because It's not going to start because you quote unquote treated your personal brand as the leading function.
Right.
Some do that, but the problem with that is it's a very brittle existence, right? And I say brittle because if you spend all your time polishing your house of glass, which is your personal brand, there's only a moment of time before someone's going to try hurling a stone at that.
Right.
Rather, if you spend your time honing your craft and talk about your craft out there, right? Talk about how passionate you are about that craft. Build in the open, create in the open. But a love for your craft, your love for it, as well as your passion that is making you an irrational person just spending so many hours on it, lead the conversation,
Right.
right? As compared to the deliberate act of putting on this branding exercise, lead the conversation. Because when your craft leads the conversation, if you will end up doing it for 10,000 hours. And whether your brand kicks off or not, if you do anything for that long, you're already an huge expert at that.
True.
So I believe that the path of craft driven leading functions are just so much more compelling than brand driven leading functions for people.
Interesting phrase that you used was irrational passion, and I'm not gonna ask you about like how to find your passion, but there are like people have so many interests and choices right now like because the internet has opened up a lot of opportunities, and people are because of the pandemic, it's boosted how people communicate. More of them are communicating like outside their cities, their countries, because of which they're getting new opportunities. So how do you think people should approach going towards building something?
Step one is possibly look at why do you seek to build in the first place, right? The very act of creating something sounds exceptionally cool for the first 24 hours, but is spine breaking, right? Beyond that, in order to stick through, right? Um, Running a marathon often would seem easier, right? Even though we compare the art of building a company and marathon to be the same thing. A marathon has a lovely amount of rhythmic consistency to it, right? Imagine a marathon, but that's being run on a roller coaster track. That is what the concept of building a product, a company, an initiative, an NGO, right? Anything that you create from scratch, which is your bare hands creating value where value did not exist before, is a journey that will teach you way more than anything else, and is also a journey that will ask of you way more than anything else. So before you get started building, be honest to yourself about why are you building something in the first place. It is okay for the answer to be literally as simple as I wish to maximize upside, right? I wish to have an opportunity of value creation, which is where value here is just money. The answer could be more intrinsic, like I have a chip on my shoulder, and that's the one I believe in the most. Entrepreneurs who have a chip on their shoulder are usually the ones who stick it out longer, stick it out more passionate, and just bring more to the table on a daily basis. So, what's a chip on the shoulder? The chip on the shoulder is this person, right? Him or her has something that they just hold a gripe around. I hate the fact that I was treated this way. I hate the fact that my relative saw this through. I hate the fact that healthcare failed my family. I hate the fact that education was fundamentally broken where I'm from. I hate a certain thing in the world, the way the world exists today, is usually a very compelling starting point for you to build, right? The building is not going to be what you start off with, right? Like the concept of creating is not what you wake up and say, this is what I'm going to do. The concept of scratching an itch is where you start off with. Now, the deeper the itch, the more pronounced the scratching, the more the more driven you get, and the more irrational that passion, and hence the more intense your ability to devote yourself to a product would be, right? Like it's sort of like a domino effect that sort of
Right.
comes through from here. It starts with that small chip on the shoulder that effectively leads to probably the next unicorn.
That's a very insightful answer. And it's been like you started Scapic in 2017. It's been around 5 years, and recently, around last year, you got acquired by Flipkart. My main question is, as a startup founder who's very committed to the company, it's like you're in a marriage with this company. How do you decide, like, okay, like I think this is the time to get acquired, or be like, no, I'm gonna do it by myself. I'm gonna raise more money and try my best to become, as you said, like the next unicorn, as big as possible. Like, how did you make that decision?
So when you're building a company, right, you have two areas that are very visible in terms of the choices you make. Decisions that are made in order to further the mission, and decisions that are made in order to further um, bias, right? Uh, Decisions that enhance bias is I could have a bias that I wish to always be CEO, the founder. I wish to always run an independent ship. The biases here are just simple intrinsic desires in order to control, in order to build, in order to whatever, right? Whatever emotional curve that he or she feels is the bias that is exhibited through. And decisions that are made on the lens of bias tend to typically be resistive to something like what you just mentioned. On the other side is decision making with the original mission in mind, right? Scapic's original mission in mind was we want to get out there to 100 million or more than 100 million odd Indians to be the only and most useful VR and AR tool, service, product, feature that's out there. The first time they fire the camera and do something in VR or AR has got to be through code that was written by us. Now, when you're mission first, you realize you've built a platform, but how do you get the next 100 million people to use that platform, right? Partnering is a faster path to realizing that mission as compared to reinventing the wheel all over again, right? If I was to be the biased entrepreneur, I would say the wheel has been built once. I wish to build this all over. And sometimes that works, right? If you're mission driven, you look at this and you say, the wheel's been built once. I wish to now use that wheel to further my mission, right? So,
Right.
two ways that you hit your decision making, and each could have a very uniquely different path that the
True.
company goes on depending on what you wear that day.
Right. And would you say, in general, you are a mission-driven founder, or is it because of, in this particular situation, in terms of Scapic, you're mission-driven, and say maybe you're doing something else, you might have taken a different path?
I believe the very concept of building the venture, right, is a very humbling exercise. It knocks you on your head so often that you can't be headstrong,
Right.
right, about most things. You can be dogged, you can be persistent, uh, but you can't be headstrong,
Right.
right? So I would be very persistent about realizing a certain vision and a certain reason why I am doing something. But I wouldn't be headstrong about it, right? Because if the game of company building teaches you one thing, it is that the music can stop, start, go up, down on 100 variables, right?
Right.
It is your ability to sort of surf these waves that makes you you. Right? And if you are headstrong there, that's not probably useful for the company. So remain driven by the mission, but remain pragmatic to know what's best for the company.
Right. So in terms of best for the company, do you mean like best for the company in terms of the product service to the customers, or like to the company employees? What do you mean by in that?
Oh, that's not zero sum, right? In fact, it never can be zero sum. Any decision you make, you have to keep in consideration every variable, internally and externally, and second order effects as well before you pull the trigger on this. Where do you choose to get acquired? What do your employees feel? What do they think about it? How do they respond to new guard? How do you feel about it? How does your acquirer integrate you? What is the broader vision over the next year, year and a half, 2 years? There are just so many questions that typically come in. And by virtue of answering one does not mean you get to not answer any of the other. In fact, it's the opposite. Every time you make a non-linear decision, it is best for you to calibrate quickly the ability for this decision to impact you positively or negatively, either directly or through second orders. Get a sense of what the blast radius would be, but you as the founder need to keep in mind every stakeholder and sort of see the way that this is going to impact them. One of the core skills is how you do that real time, right? You don't have time to keep journaling about this or thinking about this at the end of the day. You've got to make some of these decisions on the fly. It's half instinctive, half gut driven, but plenty of it is actually driven through some data, some insights, right? There are so many areas that come in, from muscle memory to your analytics dashboard, that typically lets you choose some of this. So if you are the founder in such a situation, you've got to think about the bigger picture, not both internally and externally, for you to make the right choice.
Right, yeah. You mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned that building a venture is humbling, and the second part you mentioned was taking these decisions a lot depends on muscle memory. And I think like the last year when like news articles came out that your company was acquired by Flipkart, most of the article talks about what the company is, who the founder is, how did the acquisition go through, what are the impacts. They don't talk about the journey that the founder went through before starting that company. So I just want to talk about that. During college, you did about, I think, 3 to 4 startups. I think one that I personally know is the ACE tab, like which is used by Diksha Center for Learning across Bangalore and Karnataka. So let's go back to like the first year of RE College of Engineering. Uh, I'm guessing you were bored with classes. What did you decide to do?
Oh my, the days in RV make me feel like a dinosaur already. But I think the thing about engineering is, especially with a college like RV, which is in the middle of nowhere, is it allows you enough time to think when you commute to the damn place for 90 minutes one way, right?
Yeah.
And I spend most of my time thinking what is the broader reason to be doing this over the next 4 years, right? Like, uh, think of it this way. I used to have this interesting feel of your roll number 26. Roll number 26 is a nobody,
Right.
right? Someone who has the same amount of leverage, existence, cognizance as anybody or nobody in the entire batch. That's a deeply unsettling thought,
True.
right? The fact that even arithmetically, you could be off that Excel sheet which the college maintains, and the college wouldn't blink an eye, right? And that degree of homogeneity is not just bad for you, but bad for the entire batch as a whole, which is a broader engineering problem, which is for later, right? But it is unsettling to know that that is it, right? Like that is really your existence at that point. My time revolved between classes, the mini canteen, as well as finding ways in order to bunk one to run to the other, right? Something had to change, right? Something had to change, because these 4 years would absolutely fly if they didn't. And in the scenario that they did fly by, you are a part of a cookie cutter template,
True.
right? The absolute checklist of what happens post anniversary. How do you break out of that mold? You got to break out of that mold only by a few things. You got to do something that's net negative or net positive. It's got to be some part of the polarizing spectrum, right? Now, given the deep down south Chennai roots, net negative is safely ruled out, right? Which means that you've now got to try creating something that has a positive effect on what you're up to. And the only answer for me was I couldn't make content like you. I couldn't enthrall an audience like you. I could not find ways of generating value beyond my ability to remain passionate to technology.
Right.
Right. So I went back to what is the one thing which I sought refuge in, which is devices. Right. You could choose to seek refuge in anything out there, but there is something. There is typically something that rings home more often than not. The very gadgets that we grew up with ring home for me all the time. Right. I went back to that and I said, sure, the only thing I've got, like, let me try doing something here, right? Let me try being more than just a passive consumer of it. That's when I started building my first venture in the edtech space. The ACE tab, for good or bad, was completely powered by us, and how that went through. Because apparently a 19-year-old kid can revolutionize the education system in India, right? Like that degree of naivety, right, is what I started off. And then it teaches you, right? It teaches you each time. You would be really bad at the act of company creation or project creation at first, but allow yourself to be bad, right? Because it is only from there do you know how much needs to be improved as it progresses. And that's what I did, right? I simply took enough punches, got up, dusted my shoulders, got back to building. That's it, right? Nothing differentiates anybody in a university today from creating something that is of equal or greater value faster or at the same pace that me or a bunch of other entrepreneurs in universities have been able to generate so far. The only difference is stick it out, right? Like just the act of staying alive in the concept of building a venture is in itself a miracle on its own when you're in college. We give up the moment our grades take the slightest dip. We give up the moment our lab externals needs to be the decisive point for us to be doing something. We give up the moment there is a slightest amount of discomfort with our social circles feeling that we are not spending enough time with them. Don't do that, right? Use that as your starting point. The bar is so low in terms of what you need to do in order to just get more serious about this act of org building. And the moment you're able to get past the things which I just mentioned and a few more anecdotes that might be relevant to you, you quickly realize that you're actually passionate about this. You quickly realize you're doing this because you truly feel it from your bones. Because you wouldn't have stuck it through till that if you weren't, right? So it's almost a very elegant format of natural selection, right? And when that begins to happen, you realize, cool, I am doing this because I thoroughly love to do this, right? Which is why it could be nearly 11 p.m. and I would be in the office. It could be 3 a.m. and I would be in the office. Not because I have to, but because I thoroughly love the part that I get to do that, right? So that amount of reinforcement is almost imbibed, right? And if you're able to do that in your college days, the outcome of your startup does not matter as much when you're 18 to 22. The ability for you to retrain your mind to doing something like this is what matters the most.
True. You mentioned you dabbled in the edtech space and you also founded a company called Supertext. So, what are like the most like fondest memories of building these startups? If you imagine, like you still think about them now also.
Very much. Companies are three odd stages, right? Which is you got a 0 to 1 phase, a 1 to 3 phase, and a 3 to 10 phase of sorts. If you ask most founders, what is the phase that you have overworked the most, right? They would all say it's the 0 to 1 phase, right? That's when a founder does the most amount of spine breaking work in order to get that all out there. But if you go back to the same founder and you ask them, what's the phase in a startup that you would remember the most? The founder looks back and says, it's the 0 to 1 phase. Now, hold on a minute, right? Like that's utterly confusing. The same guy or girl who just told me that they worked their butt off, right, for the 0 to 1 phase is also telling you that that's also the most enjoyable phase of the startup's
True.
complete journey, right? So it is hard, but it is probably the most magical moments that you get to be part of as you set this org into a living, breathing thing that possibly has life to go from 1 to 3,
Right.
right? And that concept of 0 to 1 building is really what gets the excitement going, and hence most of my time, even to this day, right, remains in the earliest of early stages, right, which is the 0 to 1 phase, in order to see how org building in itself can happen. Because the excitement there is high, the work is high, but the ability for you to look back at that and be like, I made that, is probably super gratifying.
True. And you graduated in 2015, and unlike other students who graduated who either went for a master's or chose a job, you were building a company for some time after you graduated. My main question is, how do you convince your parents, and how did you get out of, like, I, I guess I can say FOMO of like all your friends doing it, doing the logical things as you said, right? Like either getting a good job or doing masters. How was your thought process then? Like, how you thinking about it?
It's hard. Uh, the ability for you to convince or portray how you're thinking to people around you who are the most concerned for you is hard work, right? Your parents are out there to look out and seek what's the best for you, right? But what's best for you deep down is what you're chasing right now, right? Um, you just need to provide your parents enough of visibility into the fact that it means as much for your pursuit, right? It means as much for your chase, for your passion. That translation is hard work, right? Because most parents are not going to stop you if they buy in and believe in this world vision or drive that you have as much as you do, right? If you're able to translate that even half, I think most parents would say, go out there, right? Go crush it. So the ability for us to translate what we feel to what our parents should feel about our choices is really where some time needs to go in. And that can't happen because you decided to one day like open up and say, this is exactly what I wish to do. It rarely does, right? Like it doesn't work with a venture capitalist, right? So why should it work with people who have known you for 20 plus years? Because these are built in terms of mutual exchange of trust over a period of time, right? The give is the fact that I am giving you reason to believe in my vision as much as I do, and the take is I take from you the ability for me to go chase this vision without constant interruption and fear of failing, which would like bring back a stigmatizing effect to me. So, if in ways you are able to show your parents why should they bother and care, I think that's giving yourself the most chances of escaping unscathed, right? And with your peers, uh, it could be hard. It could be very tempting in order to take the same formula, in order to take the same direction that you do. The difference, though, is by that point of time, if you are not convinced yourself, you should probably take the
Right.
template, right? But if you are convinced by that point of time to go chase exactly what you choose to put your time and energy on, your peers don't matter, right? But if your peers do matter, that means you're not completely in this, right? You're not completely invested in bringing this to life. And that's okay. Just take a moment, take a pause, go do the template. You'll be 24 by the time you're done with it. You get back to
Right.
building them, right? 24 is still an exceptionally young part of the spectrum, age spectrum, in order for you to get started. So there is no wrong answer when it comes to peers influencing academia slash entrepreneurship. But the difference is if you are a part of a good setting, a good peer circle. I have heard of colleges where entrepreneurship is so positively looked upon that your peers actually push you
True.
into entrepreneurship, right? So there are worlds where things are changing, where it is not always the concept of, hey, when's your GRED, right? As compared to what are you building, right? Do you wish for some introductions to customers that might make sense? Why can't the act of building a company be as aspirational as writing
True.
your GMATs? Right? And I think that motion is probably the larger question. And if in ways that we could bring more sanity to that, I just think the ability for more entrepreneurs to come through from that will be so
Right.
much richer.
And like over your years, do you think there's a shift in the conversation, or in the Indian setting? What are your thoughts on the general ecosystem of startups in India?
But more than anything, it's a very different world right now, right? Like the ability for you to connect with people, interface, network, raise capital, find your co-founder, use social media as a distribution channel, the awareness around what goes behind building a company, newer technologies that are so ripe with opportunity that you need to get started with. The world that someone will build on in 21, 22, and further is just nothing like the world that the previous generation of founders built back in 14,
Right.
15, 16, right? Like these are just, and that world was in itself supposed to be a lot better than the 10, 11, 12 that had existed before that, right? So we have gone through phases of venture friendliness in India, and I think we are in the absolute best phase here. Things are easier than ever in terms of you figuring your audience, figuring your team, figuring opportunity. Things are harder than ever in terms of standing out, right? Because if everybody wishes to now take this route, take the formula, take the path that is the playbook suggested one, how do you stand out now, right? So it's easier than ever to get started. It's harder than
Stand
ever
out.
to nail what you just
Right.
got
Yeah.
started.
One interesting point I wanted to talk about is the visibility to your parents thing. I was talking to my parents a week ago, and they had no clue that I started this podcast 2 years ago. They're like, "Oh, I thought you started 2 months ago." So yeah, I think visibility is really, really important.
Very much, right? And go
Yeah.
permissionless, right? You didn't wait for your parents to nod in order for you to pick up the podcast and possibly see
Yeah.
what comes through with it. You put your mind to it, you got started, and you've been up to this for a while, and you then, without permission, got up and running, and then eventually informed that back to your parents in terms of what you were up to. Permissionless innovation or permissionless building is probably some of the best ways to get started with. And once you're able to make something meaningful from there, go back and show them
Yeah,
exactly what
I
you've done.
think that phrase is like the best term to encapsulate all this. The last topic I want to talk about is like your thoughts on metaverse and crypto and like the intersection of both. Uh, After Facebook rebranded to Meta and that whole trailer of how the metaverse is going to look like, it showed that how we are going to live in a virtual reality where we can use digital coin to transact in that universe. As a founder who's in the AR VR space, who's working towards the metaverse, how much does the financial aspect you think about in terms of like integrating crypto into all into this platform?
Very interesting. Um, I usually compare and contrast this to what I call as the 3D printing problem, right? Which is back in 2010, there was this huge push which said 3D printing is the next big thing. Every house is going to have a 3D printer. Your mobile phone case is going to be spit out by this
Right.
3D printer. Here, welcome to the future, right? That future never came. Right? That future absolutely didn't come. You don't have a 3D printer at home. I don't have one. Safe to say, our friends probably don't have one either. So what happened, right? Like what happened to this all-encompassing promised land of additive manufacturing literally in your backyard? It faded away because there was no way for you to build a speculative financial instrument around the same to prop it up, to keep it alive over a decade's worth
Right.
of innovation, right? It just starved. The oxygen in the room just went away. What crypto, NFTs, and the Web3 underpinnings bring to the metaverse is a degree of financialization of these products, which creates liquidity in the market, which props this entire ecosystem up. The availability of that liquidity is attractive for builders. Builders come in, build further. When builders create more things, the ability for the chains and the protocols as well as the Web3 platforms in order to supply for more liquidity increases. And this virtuous cycle sort of gets better, more compelling, and more immersive. Now, the absence of that flywheel is what results in technologies just fading away, right? Like going into obscurity. It is good that finally the metaverse has an easy way to remain financially relevant without hitting end point, without being a completely ready vision just yet.
Right.
And that's what crypto brings to the table. In the short run, the oxygen in the room needed in order to support innovation that is going to make this persistent 3D space and the evolution of the internet possible. And in the long run, when that vision does come through to life, the ability for you to build out completely new business models on top of that, as well as then do some really interesting ways that the token is going to be the unit economics around which your entire existence in this digital world sort of starts being
Right.
represented.
The following question is when you're thinking about like investments into this space, right? Like Web3 and Metaverse, all the VC funds or investors are looking at the long-term vision, like what Meta represented, a virtual reality where you can experience stuff, transact and stuff. On one direction, in terms of the technology part of virtual reality, it's it's hard, but it's everything related to technology and there's no people involved, so it's easier to build and you don't have to worry a lot. But on the other side, in the crypto side, you're trying to build a decentralized system, a decentralized financial system, which is very volatile. So in the long run, do investments affect this, affect the technology building part, because they're trying to combine both and see the future?
Right. So if you treat investments as a greater fool theory, right, which is I'm going to be pouring some money into this so that eventually I'm hoping that someone else comes along and I'm able to
Right.
siphon it off. And then you're in real trouble, right? Which does exist. But if you treat these investments as levers to incentivize and kickstart adoption, growth, that is super exciting in a
Right.
very organic sense, right? We have seen every industry do incentive levers. Heck, politicians do this at a country level with freebies and promises, right? Instruments to incentivize a community of users, creators,
Right.
builders, whatever, if used well, is going to be a glue that brings them tighter to the tech. The same instrument, if weaponized to be a flipper's mindset, a trader's mindset, a quick buck, a
Right.
get rich fast scheme, that is where you are taking the entire premise to a useless direction, right? But on the other side, if the same financial variables are being used for propping, creating and just springing a cold start problem, right? Like, how do you solve for a cold start engine? By providing that additional fuel up front. That additional fuel is this investment
Right.
as a lever. And if you're able to do it well, it solves for your cold start. And that solving for the cold start makes all the difference between yet another project and, all right, this is a big community driven,
Right.
adopted
Got
piece of
it.
the internet.
And one of the major markets in the Web3 space is the NFT space. And obviously, there's been a lot of support, but there's also been a lot of pushback, right? So, I want to know your thoughts about NFTs. I know you hold a couple of NFTs, maybe because you wanted to just be in the market just to see how it works. But what are your general thoughts about the NFT space?
So, at its core, we've always liked to collect and signal, right? We all own a certain brand of phones, a certain brand of products, a certain car. We live in a certain locality purely because of mimetic functions, where we want to showcase and tell people that this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm up to, this is what I want you to think of me as. These behaviors will not be just for the offline world. They will translate and move through to the online world just as much. And as these behaviors translate out, you need to find ways of capturing and
Right.
exchanging that value. And that's what NFTs provide: a way for you to bring art, scarcity, signaling, utility, community all together into a completely new format of distributing creativity, IP, call it what you need. The NFT at its very core is that. And when expressed right, is going to make a meaningful difference to a
Right.
brand, a creator, um, or anyone existing in this space to then build very meaningful use
Right,
cases on
yeah.
top of that.
I think one additional thing I would like to add is like the combination of all that provided by the trust of the blockchain. That's the, I think, missing link that was not there before, which you could share with the world. I think that's why like the NFT space boomed when the blockchain opened up, or like not opened up, but like the awareness increased among people. And you are an advisor at Polygon Studios, so you are doing some work in terms of the Web3 space. So tell us about that. Like, what kind of work are you doing there?
So most of what happens at Polygon and Polygon Studios is about how do you take a lot of what works in the decentralized space and make that accessible for millions, if not billions, of transactions, users, and people to start adopting and try using. So a lot of this typically goes into how do you take a product and break it down into something that's super technical, very difficult to use, as well as challenging for the average user, and then move it further, easier, and sort of less abstract in terms of the way that an average user can end up using them. And when you do this, you are not just creating yet another product or yet another infrastructure piece. You are literally kickstarting a whole ecosystem or a whole revolution around which people will start taking Web3 more seriously, as well as then start deploying more applications and then moving it through from there. So most of my work at an advisory capacity works around what does the next billion
Right.
users on crypto look like? How does Polygon play a role
Wow.
in that
That's
ecosystem?
I feel like I can keep going on asking you questions, but I know that you have you need to go back to building your stuff. So I want to end this podcast with like last two questions. One, what does the future of SciTech look like? Where do you think you're gonna focus most of your time and attention towards? The second question is, according to you, where's the best dosa place in Bangalore?
The second one's easier. I would always put my hand up and say CTR is really where the heart lies at. It is a pilgrimage. It's a really far place from where I am. So it's a journey and then some. On the first question, I often joke around in the team that the designation is called a reality plumber. Right? Like I see myself just as a plumber. Right? The ability for you to lay the pipes, put the plumbing, and do the things that the others simply require, so that when the time is right, the
Right.
water flows through the tap. Right? I think we're getting to a point where the water will flow through the tap in terms of what the metaverse is. You still need someone or a lot of people to do some of that plumbing, right? So just another reality plumber is perhaps where you would find most of my
Wow.
time and my
I feel like
passion
that's an
energy.
amazing end to this podcast. Thank you so much, Sai. This has been a wonderful conversation.
It's been a lot of joy
Thank you,
doing this
Sai.
one. Thanks for having me.
That's all, folks.